Hi everyone, and welcome to week 4. This week we'll be talking about synthetic performance enhancing drugs and other drugs. The objectives for this week include being able to define what is a synthetic and designer drug, being able to summarize the Federal Analog Act, talking about different types of designer and synthetic drugs, assess performance enhancing drugs in sports, describe the different types of performance enhancing drugs, and compare the legal and illegal performance enhancing drugs. The items that are due this week are your synthetic drugs choice assignment, which I will talk about in a few minutes, cheating versus competitive edge wiki, your chapter 5 quiz. It's a library worksheet, so you will begin researching for your final paper and finding peer-reviewed journal articles, your discussion board, and your journal. Sorry, I'm not really sure what happened there. There we are. Let's go back. All right, so cheating versus competitive edge wiki. So the purpose of this is to get you to start thinking about the reasons why people take performance enhancing drugs and consider the differences. Is it cheating or are you gaining a competitive edge? What I'd like you to do then is form and justify your own opinion regarding the use of performance enhancing drugs and whether you feel it's cheating or just gaining a competitive edge. To answer the questions, you'll need your book, Chapter 5 specifically, and then your own opinion to address the questions below. So the questions are: blood doping is illegal. It's used to give athletes an extra boost of red blood cells during a competition. A typical person's percentage of red blood cells is about 45%, while blood doping can raise that to over 50%. While blood doping is illegal, high altitude training is not. Training at high altitudes can also increase the percentage of red blood cells in the body, giving the athlete the advantage. Considering that, should that practice be banned? Does it give athletes who live or train in higher altitudes an unfair advantage? Almost everything athletes do is to enhance their performance. So where does one draw the line between what is acceptable and what is not? How are these level and equal playing fields defined? And if an athlete has access to the best nutritionist and personal trainer, does that place him or her at an advantage over others who do not have those resources? What about nutritional supplements or caffeine? The next assignment is a synthetic drug choice assignment. And for this assignment, you will get to choose which drug you'd like to research, as well as how you would like to present your information. I'm going to exit out of PowerPoint really quick and pull up the assignment to show you. The purpose is to become familiar with synthetic drugs and to really research one synthetic drug, explain its chemical makeup and the effects it could have on a person. The synthetic drugs you can choose from are synthetic cathinone, which is also known as bath salts, synthetic cannabinoids, BZP, fentanyl, meperidine, and MDMA. For whichever drug you choose to research, what I'd like you to look at is what is the drug, specifically its chemical makeup, and why is it considered a synthetic drug? How does the drug affect a person? In other words, how does it make a person feel? And how does it impact the person's body system? So think about physically. Provide a real life story on the use of this drug, and for this you can look at news stories, magazine articles, blogs, whatever you'd like. And lastly, consider the trends for the drug that you're researching. How many people have used this drug? How many people have died as a result of taking this drug? And any other types of statistics you can find related to your drug. Now, this assignment is a little different than other assignments in this class because I am specifically defining how I'd like you to present your information. You have the choice to present it using either a Padlet, a Prezi, a collage, or a mind map, and I have provided 2 different mind map websites for you to use. Lastly, don't forget to include references at the end of your assignment. The next assignment is your library worksheet. And the purpose of this assignment is to get you started with research for your drug paper. The good news is, after this assignment, all of the research for your drug research paper will be done. So this is taking the steps you need to take to get that paper researched and eventually completed. To do it, obviously you won't be able to visit the library in person, but you can visit Harper's online library to find peer-reviewed journal articles on your drug. There is also a way to chat with a librarian online to help you. We also have an online librarian embedded in our class. Let me show you quickly how to access her. On the left side of our menu, we have library help. Go ahead and click on that. There are two ways you can get help. You can email our embedded librarian, Christine Kuffel, or you can go to this discussion board here and post a question to the discussion board. So either of those are ways you can get help from our librarian. What you're going to do is find 5 peer-reviewed journal articles related to your drug, and you will write 3 facts or conclusions for each article. You will write the article title, reference in either MLA or APA, and then 3 facts or conclusions from the article, and then just a statement on how does this article help you with your paper. So you will do this 5 times for 5 different articles. All right, moving back to our presentation. The last assignments are your quiz, your discussion board, and then there's another journal this week, which again is that communication area just between you and I, where I'd like you to talk about your progress, how things are going for you in this class. Here's a case study about synthetic and designer drugs. It was told by J. William Langston, 1982. When I arrived, I learned that our neurology residents were evaluating a patient who had just been admitted to the locked psychiatry unit of our hospital with a diagnosis of catatonic schizophrenia. The patient's condition was indeed extraordinary. He was clearly awake, had virtually no spontaneous movement, and exhibited wavy flexibility. What this means is if his arm was raised involuntarily, it would stay in that position for a prolonged period of time. In my experience, when passive flexing the wrist or elbow of a catatonic patient, there is a distinct feeling of irregular active resistance. This patient had the lead pipe rigidity with the cogwheeling of Parkinson's disease. Indeed, he looked like a textbook case of advanced Parkinson's disease before the days of levodopa, which is a drug. But this case didn't fit either answer because he was in his early 40s and his symptoms literally came on overnight. We had a first-class medical mystery on our hands. So what happened? The patient had recently used a new synthetic heroin that had hit the streets in multiple Northern California towns as part of what became known as the designer drug phenomena. The Parkinsonism in our original 7 patients exhibited virtually all of the motor features of typical Parkinson's disease. So there were 7 patients that came in eventually. Furthermore, these patients all had a dramatic and near immediate response to L-DOPA, which is a drug to treat Parkinson's. We were able to obtain samples of the synthetic heroin through police raids and friendly dealers, and eventually obtained a batch that was comprised of almost purely MPTP, a byproduct of the synthesis of MPPP. So what are designer drugs? These are synthetic drugs that may be abused. Synthetic means man-made, and they mimic the effects of other drugs. You heard in the previous example, I talked about MPTP and MPPP. This was a synthetic heroin that had hit the streets in the early 1980s. MPPP has the potential to be extremely toxic, and it leads to the synthesis of MPTP in the body. MPTP is a synthetic drug derived from meperidine, which is also Demerol, it's highly toxic, and it causes Parkinson-like symptoms that result in paralysis to the brain. Designer drugs and synthetic drugs were initially really difficult to regulate because what would happen is once a molecular compound was identified as being illegal, the drug producers would then change the formula a little bit, making it legal again because now it was a different formula or a different compound. That brought on the Federal Analog Act, which states any chemical substantially similar to a controlled substance listed in Schedule 1 or Schedule 2 is to be treated as if it were also listed in those schedules. Controlled substance analog means a substance that has a chemical structure which is substantially similar to the chemical structure of the controlled substance, we just said that, has a stimulant, depressant, or hallucinogenic effect on the CNS, central nervous system, that is substantially similar or greater to a similar drug. And if a person is taking that drug with the intention of having a stimulant, depressant, or hallucinogenic effect that is similar or greater than a drug in Schedule 1 or Schedule 2. And so what this definition is, it's broadly defined. It doesn't narrowly define what a synthetic drug is, so that those man-made drugs and compounds can fit into this and be illegal, even if the chemist is changing the molecular structure or compound of it. There were still some issues, however. Drugs are often marketed as incense or spice or bath salts, which imply it's not for human consumption. In addition, some are labeled with not for human consumption. What I'd like you to think about is punishments, or what should we do with this? Should those companies be prosecuted under the Federal Analog Act? Does it still fit in the definition? And here are just some examples of some of those designer and synthetic drugs. If you were to turn these over, many of them say not for human consumption. We're going to go over some of the designer drugs. One is synthetic cathinones, which are also called bath salts. These are related to the stimulant in the khat plant. It reacts similarly in the brain as stimulants, but produces greater physical effects such as locomotor activation, tachycardia, which is a fast heartbeat, and hypertension, which is high blood pressure. Symptoms associated with bath salts include paranoia, hallucinations, increased sociability, increased sex drive, panic attacks, and excited delirium. Bath salts come in appealing containers and are usually contained statements not for human consumption. Synthetic cannabinoids are related to the chemicals found in marijuana. The symptoms associated with use are severe agitation and anxiety, increased heartbeat and blood pressure, nausea and vomiting, muscle spasms, seizures and tremors, intense hallucinations and psychotic episodes, suicidal and other harmful thoughts. For users who continually use synthetic cannabinoids, there are withdrawal symptoms when the product is discontinued. That suggests that there is physiological dependence. A story from a user who used spice, which is that synthetic cannabinoid, is after using spice for several weeks, I woke up early one night, fell to the floor, couldn't move my legs, and couldn't move my hips. All I could do is drag myself by my forearms, and that wasn't making it anyway, so I laid on the floor for 13 hours, screaming, pounding the floor, asking for help. Doctors say another 2 hours and I would have been dead. I'm going to be in the hospital for a long time to come. The next drug is BZP. These are drugs that have effects that are similar to amphetamines. Often they're promoted at raves as similar to MDMA or ecstasy. They're dangerous when combined with alcohol and or other drugs. This has been a Schedule 1 since 2002. And ingestion may produce dissociative states, psychosis, precipitation of mania and schizophrenia, and organ failure. Fentanyl It is a synthetic narcotic developed for its aesthetic effects or numbing effects. It's 50 to 100 times more potent than morphine. It's available in legal form and administered as an injection, a patch, or a lounger. The potential for rapid addiction is pretty high. Symptoms include depressed respiratory system, decreased heart rate and blood pressure, and can also cause constipation. MDMA is also known as ecstasy. It is a psychedelic amphetamine, popular at dance clubs and raves, and it's associated with sexual closeness and increased sexual interest. However, it decreases sexual performance. It increases dopamine, norepinephrine, and serotonin in the brain, and the impact on the body include it may cause heat stroke, convulsions, or seizures. It can cause lethal hyponatremia, which is fatal water overdose. What happens is it overheats the body, but also makes the user feel very thirsty. When you drink too much water in a short period of time, it can cause lethal hyponatremia, which is water overdose. All right, look at these athletes. What do these athletes have in common? So we have Andre Agassi, Marion Jones, I think Mark McGuire's in the middle, Ben Johnson on the right. We have Diego Maradona, Martina, Mary Decker, Claudia, I can't read that last name. But the answer is they have all tested positive for performance-enhancing drugs. The history of amphetamines. So it was probably used by athletes soon after they were introduced in the 1930s. In the 1950s Olympics, many reports of amphetamine use, and there were a few deaths. 1960 Rome Olympics, one cyclist died, several others were hospitalized due to amphetamine use. When we look at the history regarding the international drug testing, ergogenic is energy producing, which was just a general term for any performance-enhancing drug that helped produce energy. 1960, some sports began testing athletes, but problems still continued. 1967, Tommy Simpson died during the televised Tour de France, and amphetamines were found in his system. In 1968, the International Olympic Committee established rules to disqualify any athlete who used banned drugs or refused to be tested. And as we look from 1968 to today, the scope of testing at the Olympics have really continued to expand and increase over time. In American football in the 1960s, many football players used amphetamines during the game. The attitudes towards the amphetamines changed. The National Football League banned the distribution of amphetamines by team physicians and trainers in 1971. But initially, there was no testing of players who could still get the drug on their own. However, current NFL policy restricts all use of amphetamines and many other drugs. We look at the history of steroids. It is an established medical use for weight gain in malnourished people. Many U.S. athletes in certain sports used steroids in the 1960s, including weightlifters, bodybuilders, track and field athletes. And it wasn't until the 1970s where testing began. At this point, athletes began to get caught and banned from competition for steroid use. Other drugs that are used for performance enhancement include stimulants, steroids, human growth hormone, beta-2 agonist, and creatine. We look at stimulants as performance enhancers. What they have found in terms of effectiveness is that most athletes do perform better on amphetamines. However, the improvement is really small. But if you're in a sport where a small improvement is the difference between gold and silver or gold and bronze, then that improvement makes a huge difference. Think about swimming, where the first place winner wins by 100th of a second, right? That small improvement can change the outcome of that. The underlying mechanism of improvement is unclear, whether you have more physical ability, more strength, or it doesn't show that you're tired, or there are effects on the brain, increased confidence, you have a winning attitude. And at legal levels, even caffeine might provide a slight improvement in endurance performance. We look at cocaine. There haven't been formal experiments that have carried out to determine its performance enhancing abilities. It's probably similar to amphetamine use, but it's a shorter duration of action. So it only have brief effects on short-term sports. Ephedrine is available in its pure form or as an extract, or mahong is also ephedrine. The NFL banned it, but Major Baseball League did not initially, and players continued to use it for its stimulant effects and for weight loss. However, in 2003, there was the death of Baltimore Oriole pitcher Steve Beckler, and it was attributed to heat stroke, which was brought on by ephedrine, and the FDA was able to ban ephedra and ephedrine in dietary supplements in 2004. So the risks of use are, a lot of it's unknown during training. Effects are unknown during training or on competitive performance. Possible overexertion or injury due to the masking effects of stimulants. So if you're injured, it's masking your fatigue or you're tired or the pain, and you continue competing or working out on an injury. And there has also been evidence that it causes dependence, paranoid, or violent behavior patterns, and there will be withdrawal symptoms when use is discontinued. We look at steroids, the physical effects of natural testosterone. You have your androgenic effects, which are your masculizing effects, growth of the penis and or male sex gland, deepening of the voice, and having increased facial hair. And then you have your anabolic effects, and these are the tissue building effects. So increased muscle mass, control of the distribution of body fat, increased protein synthesis, and increased calcium in the bones. Synthetic or man-made anabolic steroids. Drug companies have synthesized types of steroids that have fewer of the masculinizing effects and more of the anabolic effects or tissue building. But they're not entirely free of the androgenic effects. They're not entirely free of the masculinizing effects. We look at issues in research. It's often difficult to extrapolate laboratory findings to athletes. First, athletes may use much higher doses than what are done in laboratories. Athletes may also use a combination of steroids, also known as stacking. And we look at the psychological effects of steroids that also may affect results. Users report that they feel stronger, that they can lift more or work harder, which could be a psychological thing and not a physical thing. It's the possible active placebo effect. So a belief in the power of steroids enhanced by the sensation that the drug is doing something because one can feel it. So they perform better because they think they can. The psychological effects include producing a stimulant-like high and increased aggressiveness, which may allow for more work done during training and increased intensity of effort during competition. And then risks, especially at high doses, include psychological dependence, resulting in mood swings, depression when users don't take the drugs, and roid rage. However, with roid rage, some of the stories may be exaggerated, but the number of reports of violent feelings and actions among steroid users is an area of concern. Other adverse effects include peliosis, hepatitis, which is bloody liver cysts, unhealthy changes in blood lipid levels, which is your blood fat, may contribute to atherosclerosis, high blood pressure, and heart disease, and then acne and baldness. Other adverse effects, particularly for young users, include premature closure of the growth plates of the long bones, and what this will do is limit your adult height. Special risks for men include atrophy of the testes and having breast enlargement, and special risks for women who normally only have trace amounts of testosterone include decreased breast size, enlargement of the clitoris, increased facial hair, and a deepening of the voice. We look at human hormone. It is a pituitary hormone that can potentially increase the height and weight of an individual to gigantic proportions. In rare instances of excessive body production naturally of the hormone, this is where giants are produced who are over 7 feet tall. The condition, unfortunately, usually results in early death. But experiments have shown that HGH may increase lean body mass, but may not improve strength. and it is illegal to distribute HGH for non-medical purposes. And lastly, we have creatine, which is a natural substance found in meat and fish, and it's sold legally as a dietary supplement. Some of the actions and effects include it helps regenerate ATP, which provides the energy for muscle contractions. Users tend to gain some weight, but most of it is water weight. Creatine may improve strength and short-term speed in sprinting, but there's no evidence that it improves longer distance events. And in fact, performance may decrease due to that weight gain. This concludes our presentation for week 4. Have a wonderful week. And if you have any questions, feel free to contact me.